Welcome back to another episode of Test Case Scenario. I'm pumped. How about you all? With me again are Marcus Merrell, Evelyn Coleman, and we are going to tackle yet again another topic pertaining to, I don't know, maybe testing. That would make sense. And we are brought to you by Sauce Labs, and we're just so happy to continue to do these on a bi-weekly basis. It's been a lot of fun. We should do a retrospective episode. Is it too much to do that in your, like, I don't know how many it's been, like 7 episodes or so? Or can we do a retrospective yet?
Show.
Greatest hits.
The greatest hits? Yeah, why not? It's like the band that puts out one album and then puts out their greatest hits the next album. Did Spinal Tap do that? It feels very Spinal Tappy. Anyway, on our one of our previous episodes, we talked about test automation just in generality, and the need for automation, and why would you ever not automate your tests? Is there space for manual testing? And we kind of got into that a little bit. But Evelyn, we didn't have the privilege of having you on that episode. And so Marcus and I thought we should probably talk to you about test automation because, well, Marcus, you have a very, I don't know if it's opinionated stance on this, but on your views of how Evelyn is with test automation.
I guess the way I look at it is that I did test automation for 20 years. And I failed a lot and I succeeded a lot, but ultimately the programs that I ran were fairly successful. Like, we did the right things. We learned the right stuff early on. We documented stuff. We learned from each other, me and Titus and Nikolai and everyone else. We just didn't see people in the trenches struggling as much as sometimes I think we see other folks struggle. I had someone at one point in my career, is not terribly long ago, ask, what are the trends that you're seeing in test automation? What are the things that people need? And he was expecting me to say something like, oh, a new kind of testing, like headless testing or visual testing. And my answer was, no. The number one trend I see inarguably is failure and struggle and difficulty and not getting the core facets of it right. Not only are people not automating the right thing, they're not automating the things they're doing very well in a lot of cases. So this isn't universal. I'm just saying that there are some people that are struggling out there. And I think that it would be great to get Evelyn's take on the kinds of things that she's seeing.
Oh my goodness. Thank you. It's a lot. So just, I guess, given my background, I've been at Sauce for almost 5 years now, starting in customer success. So worked with a lot of QA folks doing that, getting started, and now manage the implementation engineering team. So see a lot of customers who are just getting started, specifically. And I guess throughout those 5 years, I have seen some trends. I guess one of the topics we could talk about is where testing comes from in a company. So some companies come from a background where they used to do a lot of manual testing, and now they are moving to automation. And that journey presents itself with a lot of, I'm going to say, difficulties, trends, things that happen for basically every company that's going through that transformation.
What would you say are like the top 3 of those trends?
Of the trends, or so the things that happen in those companies,
or like the 3 things that you see the most, like if you're going from manual to automation.
Long tests, right? Because they have a book, or sometimes, if they're a little fancier, something online, something in a repository somewhere that tells them, the manual testers what to go and click and what qualifies as good, what qualifies as bad. And the first thing that a lot of companies do is they try to automate that step by step. And I talked about this in my SauceCon talk a couple years ago. I just think that the things that computers are good at and the things that humans are good at aren't always the same thing. And so when you're making a computer do testing versus when you previously had humans doing it, you have to take that into account when you're writing your tests. Computers, I'm going to put Sauce out there, right? We can run tests in parallel over many, many, many VMs, all at the same time. And you get your feedback really quickly versus, you know, a person doing it. Maybe you want them to go through the whole journey once and then start over and go through the whole journey end-to-end testing again. So again, computers have different, how do you say, pros and cons than having humans do it. So that's one thing. Very, very long end-to-end test with lots of steps. And the second thing is checking things along the way. So when a human is doing an end-to-end test, I found that they're writing, you know, they're opening it, logging in, and at that point they're checking something with the login. And then they're going in and they're the next thing, they're checking something with the next thing that they have to do, the next field that they have to input. And humans are good at that, right? I can tell you a story and I can put in some commas and go off on tangents and then get back on the same story. But for computers, I think, yeah, end-to-end tests have their place, but we always like to promote, you know, smaller chunks. Let's do that first part and call that a test and have that run across 50 VMs all at once on different configurations. Let's get some speed. Let's get some feedback. So that's, I guess it's more two things, right? It's the first, it's these very long tests with a lot of steps. And the second part that I see is a lot of pauses, a lot of tangents along the way to check out different things on that journey that are all interdependent. And if I'm testing something in my house, if I'm testing a new piece of software, it's just me and a computer and I'm doing it, that's exactly how I would do it. I would click around and I would figure things out because that's my strength as a human. But, and Marcus can probably speak to this, when you're using automation, when you're having programming a robot to do this for you, your tactics need to be different. Marcus, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. When I was at my previous job, Retail Me Not, anyone looked at LinkedIn, they could see where I worked. We used to have a list of regression tests that we would run every other week. So on Thursday, you wake up in the morning, you come to work, and everyone on the team, we're all skilled automators, but we were kind of new in the position. So we didn't really have a framework. We didn't have our tool set sketched out yet. So every Thursday, every other Thursday morning, we would come in and we would run the same set of, I think there were about 250 regression tests that we would have to run. And so I had one particular area that I would look at. It was called the store page. And I had a bunch of stuff I needed to do. So the first script was to make sure that coupons are displayed. The second step was to make sure that the links actually work, that if I do a random sampling of the 3 links or something like that. And then I would make sure that if I needed to upvote or downvote the coupon, that it would actually take the data and send the right analytics event and rejigger the order in which the coupons were displayed based on likes and dislikes. So I had like a list of 20, 30 different things that I had to look at. And I used to run them in the same order every other Thursday. And by the 4th, 5th iteration of this going through the same regression test, I found my eyes glazing over and I wouldn't really pay super attention. And I would just be like, yeah, it works. Yeah, that's probably fine. And I wouldn't check anymore like the analytics events from the HTTP traffic file. And those were the first tests I automated because I was being used like a computer. But I wasn't doing a very good job of it because I wasn't paying attention to the super details. But I know how to teach a computer how to do those tests and repeat them exactly the same way every single time. And those tests, since they don't involve a login or super detailed data generation or manipulation, I could run those tests and they would take 20 seconds and I could run them in parallel. And so after writing the scripts, you can run 100 tests like that in a matter of seconds rather than having a human waste their time. What I should have been doing, or what I ended up doing after we automated that stuff, was I'm going to sit here and I'm going to explore the site the way a user would, or maybe the way a hacker would, or maybe so I put on different hats and sort of say, I'm going to use my human brain to go to the right and left of what I think the spec is. And I'm going to pay particular attention to the area that I know has changed the most recently. And then explore. That's why they call it exploratory testing. And now I cannot teach a computer how to do that. Not even ChatGPT. So
I don't believe that. I don't. Can't convince me.
Oh, so what I'm hearing you say is we use humans for the things that humans should be good at and computers for the things computers should be good at. And I agree with that. So that's sort of the first type of testing that I see. The other type of company is a little bit more fresh and exciting, right? They are maybe new, or they've decided to start with automation. We're going to start with automation because we know that this is the way things are going. So if a new startup or a new testing department, we're just going to start with automation fresh. We're not even going to go through manual testing, or we're going to have some of that's going to be limited. And the trends I see in those companies is that it's really positive. They know that this is important. They know that this is the direction that companies are heading. But then it comes time to do hiring, and they have to hire folks to do this test strategy. And the moment they bring people to put boots on the ground and do it, what was initially a top-down initiative with a lot of people cheering test automation on, that were involved in purchasing the tools that were needed, involved in a lot of these discussions, saw a lot of the demos. It's now a bottom-up discussion where now it's all on the shoulders of these few people to not only write all the tests, but also determine the direction of the test, determine the test strategy. And there just becomes this kind of a disconnect between like, okay, well, we gave you the thing that you needed. We know that this is the right thing. And then there's a gap of involvement from that point forward. And this is a pro or a con, right? Because if you have the right team to do this bottom-up test strategy building, that's amazing. But if you put all of your cards on the wrong person, or the wrong team, or the wrong framework, or the wrong tool set, and then you leave it alone, it's going to fester. And you're not going to get what you were looking for. And you may feel, as somebody who made these decisions up at the top, you may feel that maybe it's test automation that's the problem. Maybe if we just done it the other way, like I did at my last company with manual testers and some limited automations, maybe that would have gone better. Or you blame the tools and you say, well, it's because we picked this language, or it's because we picked this, or it's because and you might not understand because you've been disconnected from it for a while, or vice versa. If it goes really, really well, then it's all because of the testing, and that's great. And that, obviously we all love a good, happy story, but there's still some flaws with that logic, regardless of whether it went well. So that's the end of the second type. And then everything else is a hybrid, something in between that has some of those issues or some of those positives. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. It occurs to me that I think the top-down motion tends to end up with, a good strategy poorly implemented, and the bottom-up, it ends up being skillfully created wrong tests.
Yeah, exactly.
If that makes sense. And sometimes you get both.
Exactly. Yeah, the skillfully created wrong tests.
Yeah.
Which is easier to fix? So everyone has the best intentions, but which of these kind of failures is the easiest to overcome?
I would have said the top-down approach is the easiest to overcome, except for the talent pool out there. Hiring the people who can really do test automation skillfully turns out to be rather difficult. Because the people who are good at test automation almost invariably get poached into software development, feature development. So people don't tend to stick in this career like crazy people like me and Titus and Nikolai and others.
So it's interesting to hear you say that. Well, I also want to hear Evelyn's answer to that question, actually.
Me too.
Oh, yeah. No, I'm trying to think. I think they're all really difficult to turn around. I mean, if it depends on how long you've let it go, right? Like how long did you get? If you have the first strategy, right, where you are converting a bunch of manual tests to automation, and you decide, you see that there's problems, and what typically happens is people throw more people at it. We just need to hire some more folks to write more test automation so we can get through all these books of manual tests. Let's just throw some more people. Let's throw some more resources at it. And then it's hard to turn around, because to fix it, you also need more resources. But by the time you've realized you have a problem, you've probably run yourself dry. So if you can catch these things early, I don't think anything is necessarily hard to turn around. But if you catch it too late, if you've let it fester, you had that other approach, right, where you let somebody build the wrong test, or you let somebody put in really, really bad tests because you weren't involved, you might have to rip and replace, and that's expensive. It's hard. So there's like a saying about like an inch of prevention is worth a pound of medicine or something. I probably butchered that.
I can't remember. Ounce of precision, ounce of prevention is worth a pound of, I don't know.
Well,
Maybe
Marcus butchered it way worse than you did.
Thanks,
So
Marcus.
Absolutely.
So
In
much
trying to
better.
help you, I made things worse. That tracks so hard.
Yeah, so I don't think either one is easier. I think it's just a matter of when you catch them. Probably easier to rip and replace in a small company that's just decided to go with automation than a big company that's put millions of dollars into resources to build out lots of automated tests that then all have to get fixed.
Yeah, I mean, so if I'm leading up a company and I'm trying to choose what to do when it comes to testing, and it's like, well, I can just continue doing manual testing because maybe the labor is less intensive, and if I don't have to correct something if it goes wrong, I don't have to spend all this money because the automation test, what you just said is that's going to be very expensive, and I'm afraid of that. But is that really the smartest approach to that, or is it going to end up costing me more when I miss something and I release software that isn't good? Like, I don't know. How would you address a company that's thinking that way? Because I don't know. I would assume that there are a lot of companies that do think that way.
Ultimately, and again, I'm going to make this very clear that I do think that there is a huge place for manual testing in the workforce and in test automation, with the caveat that ultimately, I would say to a company that is struggling with that risk assessment, which is what that is, that there is no alternative, right? Time is moving forward. Your company is becoming more technologically advanced, and the companies and your competitors, everyone around you, is becoming more technologically advanced. So while there is a huge risk of getting it wrong, it's a risk you have to eat, and just try not to mess it up the first time.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in doing the big rocks, and I know that I saw a talk given by the head of QA for Etsy. Now, this was 10 years ago, and I know that a lot has changed, but he said that at one point they had these hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of tests that they would run, and the automation and sort of clearing the hurdle of all the noise that came out of their test automation was so great that in the end, they just wrote 7 good, reliable Selenium tests that told them, yes, we can ship, and we'll fix forward anything big that happens. They wouldn't do that on every release. Like for major releases, when they're changing like the database tables and stuff like that, they would put more rigor into the manual testing. But they basically had a rubric that said, if we pass these 7 tests, then your code can go to production. And I feel like that is kind of a lean way to get going with that. It's like, what is the minimum number of tests you need to sort of convince yourself that your blast radius is going to be small on whatever change you just made?
I love that. Yeah, you can start small, minimum viable product.
Viable tests.
Minimum viable tests, which I think should get talked about a lot. We could do an entire podcast on just that topic. But yeah, I hope that answered your question. Maybe I was a little bit stern about it.
No, I think that was good. I think a lot of people think that way. Like, when you do a risk assessment, is it worth it? And I think you just answered that question. When it comes to minimal viable tests, I think we definitely can talk about that, because I think some people think that, okay, I have to go from manual to automation and I got to automate everything now.
Yeah.
And it's just simply not true. And, it's unfortunate he's not on today's show, but Dylan has mentioned to me some interesting ideas to like automate, and he's like, just find the thing that you hate the most, and it doesn't have to be anything major, and automate it. And it's a task that repeats anyway. That's the easiest thing to go after, right? The task that's going to be repeated anyway and is low impact on the business, and automate that first. And then once you got that, move on to your next. And it's like baby steps.
Yeah, get some gratification.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think that's good. Just make sure at some point you're starting to look at the business value earlier than the difficulty part is what I would say. But
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to add to that and say before you even touch the mouse, right? Before you touch or the keyboard, the text editor, chat GPT, whatever you're going to choose, whatever your tool of choice is to automate your tests, you could do a lot of cleanup of your tests that aren't automated. You could go through those big books of manual tests. There's a lot of spring cleaning you could do in terms of making sure that those tests are in line with the things that need to happen before something deploys, that those are in line with your business values and the important parts of your application or your system under test. You could minimize some of the risk of swapping over by, yes, doing things in smaller chunks. But also let's start with a good foundation, because what's good for the goose is good for the gander, right? Like if you have huge books of manual tests and all these things that need to happen, maybe you don't need those to begin with.
Yep. Yep, that sounds great. I mean, I think I've told this story before, but I'm not sure it's on this podcast, about the poor soul I ran into at the Selenium conference a few weeks ago, who he runs the internal test infrastructure for a big giant bank, and there are 15,000 Selenium tests in their suite that are run by, they're basically in this pipeline that have been contributed by hundreds of different teams. They each have their own. And I asked, okay, so what's the pass rate on those tests? And he said, oh, on a good week, it's 80%. On a bad week, it's, 50%. And I'm like, okay, so 15,000 tests. And on any given week, between 10 and 12,000 of those tests will pass. Between 3 and 5,000 tests will fail. Do you understand? Do you study every single failure you get? Like, no. Do you understand then that you are getting zero value out of your suite?
Yeah, it's pointless, right? Then why are you testing it if you're not going to evaluate the failure?
The tests running in the woods with nobody to...
Yes.
Yeah. So my point was that it's not just that your tests are worthless, but that you are essentially lying to the rest of the organization by representing that you've got test coverage where you don't.
That sounds dangerous.
Yeah, no, it's dangerous. It introduces risk to your own career, not just the business.
Yeah.
There's also, there's costs associated with that on every single level. And that's why, maybe if they'd done some spring cleaning before automating all those tests, they could have started with a cleaner slate. But we can still end up in that exact situation, having done everything right, because over time you write tests. How often are we deleting things just when they break? What are we doing to maintain them? And so that's, I guess, the other trends that we're seeing is we've got we have people who have great test houses, like great test strategy, but they still have bad, like really high failure rates. And a lot of it is just things that are running, but nobody's home. Tests that have been scheduled to run. I've seen, in certain economic times, people get laid off or leave a company and their tests are still running and no one's checking on them. And why? There are ghost tests in the system, and it is costing people. It's costing you risk. It's costing you financially. So maintenance is another big thing. Is even if you get everything else right, you still have to do the big maintenance.
Yeah, and I would also be remiss not to mention, for those who are struggling, maybe on the newer side of implementing automation, that if you are concerned and you don't know where to begin, there is a wonderful community of testers. I mean, it is a vibrant, wonderful community of people who are willing to help and each other and do help each other. And I would highly recommend joining various aspects of the community. There are so many ways to join this community that exist. And, we have wonderful people, obviously, at Sauce Labs who come on this podcast and share, but there are there is content all over that you can find on the subject, and educate yourself and participate in the community and reach out to us. We're always willing to help as well. So
I have a follow-up question to that, Jason.
Oh,
Given
sure.
that there is a beautiful, robust community, and I've met lots of members of the testing community, and all of them have been just really friendly and nice. There's a lot of really strong opinions about how to test, right? There's pictures of triangles,
Yeah.
testing rocket ships, testing ice cream cones, and you flip it upside down, right? And if you're new and you're risk averse, you're worried about making the wrong decision, how do you pick the right person to follow? And I guess this is a question for Marcus. How do you know?
I mean, I kind of follow them all. I've got a document of about 50 different people that I think I shared with Jason when he first started.
Yeah.
I follow them all, and I think that you cannot have one answer to all questions. I mean, there's some general advice we give, but like when I hear strong opinions that are strongly held, I tend to think that that person has probably not been exposed to enough variety of experience to really, Titus Fortner to me is a brilliant example of someone whose strong opinions are very loosely held. If you bring data and you have examples, he will rant and rave until the cows come home. But if he's wrong, he will be the first to admit it, and he'll pivot. And that's the way people tend to be in this community, as long as they've seen enough variety of opinions and experiences.
It's so great to see some of the conversations that happen within this community, whether it be on Twitter or other various communities, LinkedIn and whatnot. I'm not going to name all of the communities that are out there, but it's great to see some of the side conversations that go on, because these are testers who have been doing this for years and have opinions, but someone else will come in and be like, well, what if you did it this way? And the conversations that happen are so interesting to see unfold that it literally just, some of them came out of Selenium conference. Some of them came out of an interview Nikolai just did with Kent Dodds, some really cool stuff. And I know Christian Broman came in on that conversation. So to see some of these people in the industry just communicating with each other and just follow along, and you'll learn so much from them. I know I have in just a short period of time, and from you all too. And so if you're new to the game, I would recommend following along. Certainly this podcast, but many others, and many other, Nikolai's show, and Marcus, you're out there all the time, and give Evelyn a phone call. Evelyn, give out your cell phone, please. Kidding. No, but
Docs our enablement director.
yeah, exactly. No, well, thank you. This was a really good, I found this to be really educational, because this is the other side. This is kind of the ugly side of automation. Is it's not easy. And there are, obviously significant ways where it can go wrong, but knowing that ahead of time and the ways to navigate that so that you don't fall into the trap. What did you say earlier, Evelyn? It was like being able to course correct earlier in the process, right? Is much less costly and
much less costly.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Evelyn and Marcus. And for you, our listener, for listening along. We hope you had as much fun as we did recording it, as we always have a lot of fun recording these. I think this is one of my favorite parts of the day, is recording these episodes with you all. And join us again in a couple of weeks. And I'm not really sure what we're going to be doing on that episode. Maybe we'll keep tackling topics on testing. Maybe, I don't know. What do you think? That's a good idea?
Yes.
Yeah, I think so too. All right. Well, join us again as we continue on Test Case Scenario. See you then.